If a large contingent of SNP MPs are elected at the general election, what effect will this have on the UK Parliament?
If a large contingent of SNP MPs, then talking now on the polls of 56 out of 59, I think was the latest poll today, if they are elected at the general election, what effect is this going to have on the UK Parliament? Kezia, you start on this.
Well, look, that's very much what's going to happen based on the polls that have come out this week. They are terrible polls for the Labour Party, and they are fantastic polls for David Cameron. There's no excusing that. It's not rubbish. The biggest party, David, the biggest party forms the government. It's been that way since the 1930s, since the Second World War. That's just the reality of the situation. The more SNP MPs that make it to Parliament, the greater chance David Cameron has of getting back behind that door in number 10. And let me just say this. There's a lot of news reports this week about the trouble the Labour Party's in, the damage this is causing and all the rest of it in my party. This isn't about the future of my party. This is about what the cost, the price of 5 more years of the Tories is. I'm not prepared to stand for that. So I'm going to campaign week in, week out, day in, day out to get David Cameron out of number 10 and let's start getting a fairer, more progressive country back.
Just dealing with the SNP issue, why then did you say, I've no qualms whatsoever about working with the SNP, I'm not tribal?
I don't consider myself a tribal politician. I think a lot of people want to see their politicians working together. But
so you would work with us in Westminster?
Let me say that, and we'll come on to the SNP in a wee second. What I'm setting out to do is to win a Labour majority.
Yeah, but we should be on the SNP, because that was the question. It wasn't about Labour, it was about the SNP. So Hamza's quite right. The question was, if there's a large contingent of SNP, and you've admitted yourself the polls are looking that way, what effect will it have on the UK Parliament? Ruth, maybe you'd answer that.
Well, I think Ed Miliband
do you accept what she says, that it will let the Tories in if the SNP does well up here?
Well, no, because Hamza and I are quite clear about the fact there will be no deal between our parties after the general election, no matter what the result is. You've heard the words and read them back to Kezia of what she said. You've had the Deputy Leader of the SNP saying it'd be silly not to have a deal. You've had Ed Miliband asked about this again and again and again, and he's refused to rule it out. But you know what? Let's not talk about divvying up the voters just yet, because we've not asked them to vote yet. And despite all of this tactical voting, get so-and-so, vote so-and-so, get so-and-so, what I say to voters at home is vote for the party you believe in. Vote for the policies you believe in. Vote for the Prime Minister you want. Vote for the MP that you want for your seat. And do you know what? You'll walk out of the voting booth with your head held high.
Yeah, but that doesn't answer the question. But that's fine. But on the present reckoning, according to the polls, that means in Scotland, 56 SNP MPs are going to be returned, with people holding their head up high.
Well, on the polls of 8 seats yesterday being extrapolated out, I think that there is a lot of politics to go between now and May.
Okay.
And I think, David, everybody in this audience will understand how quickly politics is moving in Scotland right now. Not just before September, but after September too. So I'm not taking anyone for granted in Scotland. We came out of the referendum with a spring in our step. We're the only pro-UK party that's actually going into this election with a positive story to tell, saying if you want a strong Scotland within the UK, if you want to keep a strong economy, then vote for the Scottish Conservatives. That's the pro-party message I'm taking. That we should vote for, not we should vote against.
So there are a lot of hands up, and I'll come to you in a second, but Hamza, for the SNP, if this poll turns out to be anywhere near right, if they're 50, 56, whatever it is, and you do in effect have a wedge in Westminster, what effect is it going to have on UK government?
A positive effect. I mean, we, like all the other panellists, certainly believe that the election in 62 days' time, there's a lot of politics to still go. We don't at all take anything for granted. In fact, we will have to work our socks off to get that kind of result, and we're prepared to do that. But it will have a positive effect.
Sorry, let me just interrupt you. Supposing the Conservatives have the largest number of MPs in the House of Commons, and you say you won't work with them, then what?
Yeah, sure. That's exactly what I was going to go on before you interjected. Was that, look, as Ruth said, absolutely no deal whatsoever, and any informal or formal type of deal with the Conservatives. In terms of working with Labour, yes, we would look at issue by issue. We certainly probably wouldn't do a coalition, as the First Minister has previously said. Looking at an issue-by-issue basis, yes, we would do that. But when I take umbrage with what Kezia said is on this point, that she says that the people have abandoned Labour. It's not. The reason you're getting a hammering is because the Labour Party has abandoned the people. And the point is very, very clear. Going to David's point, let me address David's point. Let me look at issue by issue. The First Minister has made it very clear. The SNP is standing on an anti-austerity agenda. We don't believe that you can successfully grow the economy on the backs of the poor. What we will do is put forward an anti-austerity plan. What we'll do is, with the other progressive parties in Westminster, the Greens, perhaps the Welsh Nationalists, put together a policy, progressive agenda, roll out the living wage across the United Kingdom, and don't spend £100 billion on the obscenity of nuclear Trident missiles.
Okay, go on, get to it.
You've just made a very, very strong claim to be a progressive party, yet you haven't got a single progressive tax policy. Until last week,
yes,
you were all for cutting corporation tax. Compare it to the Labour proposals. If you're talking about seriously being against austerity, you would increase taxes on those who are wealthy.
Right.
You're talking about a 50p tax, a mansion tax, a banker's bonus
Let's
tax.
not go down the route of what you're going to be saying over the next.
But it matters because he's saying he's a progressive politician.
Yes.
Well,
but we're talking about the effect.
If you agree with
of what
our progressive policies, then of course, issue by issue, you will get that support. And the point is this: the irony is the policies that we're putting forward, Kezia, the policies we're putting forward were policies that the old Labour Party would have agreed with. The irony is this: you've managed to find yourself on the right side of the Tories and the wrong side of the Scottish people.
You haven't answered my question. I think that Alex Salmond once said that it was the party with the largest number of MPs that had the right to rule. So if the Tories have the largest number of MPs, you're going to frustrate that right? What are you going to do?
No, as I said, we will do no support, give no support whatsoever to the Tories. And an issue by issue basis...
Even if it meant another election? Even if it meant another election following?
We would be prepared by an issue by issue basis to look at working with the Tories, with the Labour parties. It's exactly that'll get me in trouble. Yeah, so that ministerial career of mine lasted about, good.
All right, okay.
With the Labour Party.
Let me hear from some members of the audience. The person there in the centre, you, yes.
To Mr Yousaf, how can you say that you will not back the Tories in a Westminster government when it's a well-known fact that the Scottish Conservatives, which Truth leads, have backed a number of your policies when you were a minority government in the Scottish Parliament? Because that's just you turning your backs on them.
So did Labour and so did the Lib Dems. That's what we do in a minority.
Okay, just answer. Let me chair this, not you. You answer his question, if you would. Yousaf? You're silent. Can you ask his...
Oh, sorry, I thought you were pointing to the audience. No, we were a minority government, and clearly in a minority government we got support from the Labour Party, we got support from the Lib Dems. The point is this: we are ruling out unequivocally, unambiguously any type of support for the Tories.
Okay, fine.
What we want to do is work with the Green parties and the other progressive parties to put forward a progressive agenda that is anti-austerity.
In other words, it's different
from
what happened in Scotland, what will happen in Westminster. The man up there on the left, please, you, sir. Yeah, yes, you.
I'm really surprised to hear Kezia Dugdale trotting out the same old mantra about if you want to keep Tories out of Westminster to vote Labour. It hasn't done any good in the past 6 months. Lord Ashcroft's second poll just proved that. It's time to change the record. It's getting broken. I think only twice since the war has it made a difference in Scotland to what government gets sent to Westminster. Okay. We voted in 50 Labour MPs in 2010. We got the Conservatives. During the Thatcher years, same thing happened, and it made no difference to the people of Scotland.
Yeah. Danny Alexander.
Well, I don't think it would have a positive effect. I think you can see in the Scottish Parliament the way the SNP government has taken their eye off the ball, some of the key issues in public services in Scotland. You can see the problems in the NHS in Scotland, for example. You can see, certainly from my part of the world, in the Highlands and Islands, it may be different here in Glasgow, many of the key issues that people are concerned about, whether it's investment in the transport system, whether it's supporting the NHS in the Highlands, those are things that have been set to one side by the SNP that's more interested in having the sorts of rows that we've seen between Humza and Kezia just now.
But what would the effect be if this happens?
I don't think it would have a positive effect, because
you wouldn't be there according to the polls either, would you?
Well, I'm quite prepared to... Of course, it's true that a lot of MPs have a tough fight in this election, and that's right. But look, I'm going to fight for every vote that that I can get, because I think I've got a good record of standing up for the Highlands and delivering a strong economy and a fairer society through our work in government at the UK level. I've got a record to be proud of in that respect.
But
and I'm going to make that argument. But I think the idea that you send a bunch of people who want to break up the United Kingdom and expect that's going to have a constructive effect on the way the United Kingdom is governed is just for the birds.
All right, well, now, let's just tap into your experience of 5 years of coalition government and answer Isabel's question, which is what would actually happen if these polls come out right and the SNP hold the balance, not the Liberal Democrats.
Well, the other parties have to speak for themselves.
No, but what do you think would happen as an observer of the political scene, which you might be?
I have to say, I think you would no more. I think you would no more put the SNP in charge of the United Kingdom than you would put UKIP in charge of the European Union. I don't actually think. I don't actually think that there's any evidence that they would seek to play a constructive role in actually making sure that we keep our recovery on track, that we deliver the changes that we need to see in this country.
Would you go back into coalition with the Tories?
Look, I've always said that we would talk to whichever party has the strongest mandate, because that's the democratic thing to do. If the people of the United Kingdom give one party or another the most seats, of course I'd like that to be the Liberal Democrats, but I recognise that is unlikely. And of course we would talk to those people first. But our test would be, can we form a coalition agreement or an agreement that enables us to deliver some of the things like we've delivered in this Parliament, income tax cuts for millions of working people.
All right, let's not go through the mantra.
Well, it's very important.
I know, but we're talking about the outcome afterwards.
Yeah, but the outcome, David, is in terms of policies. And folks here haven't cast their votes yet.
No, but you're not here to electioneer for votes.
Well, I don't know. Come on.
Paddy's point's a good one, David, because the stated aim of the SNP is to break up the United Kingdom. They're not keen to help govern the United Kingdom. They want to end the United Kingdom.
The woman on the end there. Yes. I want to hear from a member of the audience.
Hamza, you said that you would do a deal with the Tories. So who would you rather have Prime Minister? Because there are only two people going to be Prime Minister. Who would you choose?
Oh, listen, that's like asking a choice of whether you want a poke in the eye or a punch in the arm. You know, I mean, it's hard like any of them to be. But look, I know the damage that the Conservatives. I know that the damage the Conservatives have done to Scotland. When Ruth Davidson says our stated aim is to break up the United Kingdom, actually our stated aim is to speak up and always will be, not just speak up for the Scottish people, but speak up for the poorest that don't have a voice. And we will do that with whatever party we can form a progressive alliance with.
OK. The woman in pink. I'll come to you, David. Woman in pink there, yes. You.
There's an elephant in the room here that some of you aren't addressing. Why do the polls show that the SNP are liable to return 50, possibly? I don't think that so many maybe will be elected, but the SNP are very popular now. Why do the polls show that? That's what I would like to hear.
Well,
why
whether
do you
the
think?
polls are accurate, you mean, or why they think?
Why do you think that the Scottish people seem to have turned against your parties?
All right.
That's what I would like to know.
Toby Young, as an observer of this, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel a bit like I've got between husband and wife going through a really messy divorce. To go back to Isabel's question, I think how critical the SNP MPs are after the election will depend upon the outcome of the election. And I wouldn't rule out a small overall Conservative majority. I agree with the gentleman over there who said that actually the Conservatives have got a pretty good track record to fight on. This is the fastest growing economy, not just in Europe, but in the developed world. There are 1.85 million more jobs now in the UK than there were in 2010. More jobs have been created in Scotland than in the whole of France in this Parliament. So I think the government does have a pretty good track record to fight on. I think the only situation in which the SNP MPs will make a critical difference is in the unlikely event of Labour ending up as the largest single party. I think an overall majority for Labour is out of the question, but if they end up as the largest single party and could form a government with the support of the SNP, what Hamza is proposing, which is a kind of a piecemeal, deal-by-deal arrangement, I think is a recipe for absolute chaos. I think that Ed Miliband in that situation would want to enter into some sort of pact, some sort of confidence and supply arrangement with the SNP. And I think the problem with that, the reason he hasn't ruled it out, but the problem with that is, as Ruth says, is that how can you go into government with a party that is going to hold you to ransom and which doesn't have the best interests of the United Kingdom at heart? It's a bit like inviting Guy Fawkes. It would be a bit like inviting Guy Fawkes to sit down at the cabinet table.
All right.
Val. All my life, all the time I have been on this planet, Scotland has voted to the left. I think Scotland has a fundamental sense of society, a fundamental sense of wanting to do the right thing, about being redistributive, about looking after the poor, all of these things. And for all of my life, that meant voting Labour. During the 2 years of the fight leading up to the referendum, Labour got right into bed with the Tories. And I think that the Scottish people are finding that very hard to get past. And what we saw... And I think what we're seeing now is the Labour Party in Scotland being punished for not being able to understand that they could support a no vote without having to get into bed with the Tories. And it now seems, from a Scottish perspective particularly, that the SNP are the party who do speak for the left. And I think if there is a substantial number of SNP members in the next Parliament, then, you know, with luck, if everything goes with a following wind, they can drag Labour back to the left and away from the politics of
I hear what Val says, and I've heard it many times before because I spend a lot of my time out in constituencies, chapping on doors and speaking to people, and I get that people are angry with the Labour Party, which is why over the next few days and weeks we've got to spell out why we're different, why we're committed to ending austerity.
But do you agree with her analysis that you got into bed with the Tories when you didn't actually need to in asking for a no vote?
Look, I disagree with 99% of what David Cameron stands for, and I had to work with him during the referendum, and I found that really uncomfortable. There's no denying that. And
you didn't have to. You could have taken a principled stance that wasn't in...
I understand that point of view, and there was a very clear yes campaign, a very clear no campaign that did create some unlikely alliances. You know, there were some people in the Yes campaign that were brought together. You had tax exiles and Tommy Sheridan lining up to share platforms. There are strange mixes of people that it brings together. But what I'm trying to say to you, Val, is that we have a duty now to show that we're different, that we're committed to ending poverty and to tackling inequality. And actually, hang on, Humsey, one second.
One time in government to do that,
and we did. We lifted 200,000 kids out of poverty, 100,000 pensioners out of poverty.
Do you think you're answering her question, the woman in pink there, who said, why is it, do you think, that you've fallen from favour? Is that why?
Answering my question, sorry.
Say it again.
I don't think my question's been answered. If I could just agree with this gentleman over here that this constant mantra of vote SNP, get Tory, vote SNP, get Scotland, because we have voted... I'm quite an elderly person, but I've got a memory, and I have voted for the last 40 years. I voted Labour for a large part of that until the war in Iraq, and now I'm a member of the Scottish National Party, and we are hearing out on the streets, on the doorsteps, on the telephones, I will never vote Labour again. They have sold us out, and that's what we're
I'll try and answer your question if I can. And the reason I think that the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrat Party are being punished in the polls right now is because you don't know whether to believe them or not. Because Danny's party is running away from their record in government and the Labour Party is running away from their record in Better Together. I'm proud of the part I played in Better Together. Now, I know this is a mixed audience. I know many people here voted on the other side of it from me. And I absolutely respect people that were standing up and making that argument. I stood up and made the arguments that I believed in. And there's a reason why the polls that everyone's talking about, the Ashcroft polls, the Conservative vote in Scotland is actually going up, not going down. It's because people saw us stand up for what we believed in. And there's a lot of people in this audience that won't agree with me in politics. I absolutely understand that. But people know that when I'm saying that I'm passionate about something, it's because I really mean it. And I don't run away from anything I did in the Better Together campaign.
I think it's high time we move away from this political dogma, either vote Labour or you get Conservative, and get to the real question. If the the great amount of British people do vote the Conservative, and they have to work with the SNP. That is what the people demand. It's not really in your position to say, no, we're not going to work with these people, because in the last election, I did campaign for Labour, and at this moment, I'm quite a bit confused, because I found the Labour policies not quite dealing with the issues that I wanted to address. And for the Conservative, I felt like they're not dealing with the issues that I want to address. Then, if I eventually vote for one, I would want to see a form of communication going on, other than this division that we're seeing around, this debate, really.
All right. OK, and you, sir, in the middle there. I'll come back to you on the panel in a moment. Just let me hear one or two members of the audience. You, sir.
In the event of hung parliament, the SNP, Ms Sturgeon, has said that she will not do a deal with the Tories. Why will Ed Miliband not say unequivocally, no nonsense, that he will not do a deal with the SNP? Is it because they are already doing behind-the-scene talks about removing Trident from Scotland, and perhaps another couple of years down the line there's going to be another referendum at the behest of the SNP?
Okay, Kezia?
No, that's simply not the case. The reality of the situation is that we're trying to respect your rights as voters to cast a vote. And why would we carve it up behind the scenes in smoke-filled rooms and do deals? That's the very worst of politics. You go to the polling booth, you cast your vote, the country will speak, and then the day after that we'll have to work out what type of government we have. At the end of the day, only two people could be Prime Minister: David Cameron or Ed Miliband, and I'm desperate to know which one Humza wants to see in power.
Toby.
There's a clear answer to your question, and the reason Ed Miliband hasn't ruled it out yet is because he thinks it's his best hope of becoming Prime Minister, and he doesn't mind. He'll meet whatever conditions the SNP impose. If they want him to commit to an extra £180 billion of spending in the lifetime of the next Parliament, which is one of Nicola Sturgeon's red lines, he'll accept that. If they say give up our independent nuclear deterrent, sounds like he'll do that too. He's desperate to be PM. He thinks that's his only hope.
You think he'd give up the... Sorry, you're saying he'd give up the nuclear deterrent?
I think he'd be prepared to negotiate about that, yes.
What,
I don't think that's off the table.
Abandon the policy that Labour has fought over and then pursued...
well, hang on, David.
There was a poll...
David, he sacrificed his own brother. Of course he'll sacrifice a policy.
50%. First of all, he's not going to take responsibility for that policy. 50% of the Parliamentary Labour Party are in favour of scrapping Parliament. 75% of candidates not yet in Parliament are in favour of scrapping Trident. So actually, the weight within his own party would be towards doing that and agreeing to that.
Danny Alexander.
I think that a lot of people in Scotland and across the rest of the United Kingdom find either the idea of the Tories in a majority governing by themselves or of Labour in a majority governing by themselves pretty scary, actually. When you look at the way in which the Tories want to go for cuts and austerity far beyond what is necessary to balance the books, which is what we're trying to do at the moment. When you look at the mess, the cluelessness that you see in the Labour Party and the heartlessness in the Conservative Party, it's no wonder that people are saying that's not what we want. All I'd say is, if you send a whole lot of SNP MPs to Westminster, they will not be trying to look at how can you govern the United Kingdom constructively, how can you make the changes that need to be, how can you make the changes that need to be made. I would say, if you want to keep the country on a straight and narrow, if you want to have a strong economy and a fair society, combine those two things. Actually, that's what the Liberal Democrats have been delivering over the last 5 years. We've made a bloody good job of it. No, and I'm going to continue to fight on the basis of that record, right the way through to the election.
I must respond on this, actually, because you're saying that the Liberal Democrats are the bastions of all morality, saying that they've created a fairer society. I'll tell you what, while you're in Glasgow, why don't you talk to the 71,000 people that have been in food banks in the last 6 months and ask them whether or not it's a fairer society? Or why don't you ask the 100,000 children that you're going to put into poverty by 2020? Let me just address this point very quickly, David. Actually, we've had Labour MPs this week, Gisela Stewart, saying the Labour Party should not rule out a grand coalition with the Tories. We've had Labour Party members of the Senior Policy Forum saying that Labour Party activists should be voting for the Tories. In half my lifetime, I've had Tory governments imposed on this country that we in Scotland have not voted for. All we want in the SNP is to have a progressive agenda. Yes, let's not harm people. Let's invest in people. Let's not agree to the austerity agenda. Let's invest in public services because people have been hammered, the poor have been hammered, and those at the top of society have got away with it because of this small...
Actually, what you would do is have the country borrowing more, getting into more debt. You'd set aside the plan that has got us to the economic recovery we have at the moment. It's creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. Hundreds of thousands of jobs here in Scotland, here in Glasgow. A city deal for Glasgow, which is creating jobs, supporting businesses, enabling investment. These are the things that are making a difference to our economy. The idea that you'd have SNP MPs to carry that through.
More zero-hours contracts than we've ever seen in this country.
I'm going to take a couple more points from the audience, and then we'll move on. The man in spectacles in the second row from the back, please.
Yes, we've got to end up with more pandas, and we're going to have Labour and Conservatives put together in Scotland.
How many pandas have you got?
Two.
You've got
so
two
far.
pandas, haven't you?
They might breed this year, so we might have three.
You might have three by election day. OK, and let me just see. I'll take 1 point from, yes, you, sir, there, on the, at the top there.
I can't understand why Mr Miliband is so utterly unprincipled if he will not... because if the SNP will not deal with the Conservatives, and the Conservatives won't deal with the SNP, if Labour turned round and said no, they wouldn't lose 40 MPs because the SNP would be utterly irrelevant in Scotland. So for him to become Prime Minister, this unprincipled individual is sacrificing 40 people in his own party. I think that's scandalous.
So you think you think simply that if he said he won't do a deal with the SNP under any circumstance, the Labour vote would rise in Scotland?
I think it would, because the SNP would be irrelevant.
All right, well, we'll make a last point there. Why doesn't he do that?
I just think that completely disrespects voters. I think what we want to do is campaign for a Labour majority government. And I tell you this point, coalition seemed like a good thing until Danny teamed up with David Cameron. I think what we need is a strong majority government that can govern for this country to tackle the poverty that we're talking about. Now, I think...
That worked so well last time, didn't it?
Well, actually it did, and it did a hell of a lot better job than we did. An awfully lot better job.
All right.